Okay, I will speed up a bit. So our next speaker is Sibel Adali. She's professor at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York. She's currently Associate Dean of Science for Research and Graduate Study, and her research concentrates on computational models of social and information trust and credibility, and especially in network scenario. And as a side note, she also maintained a page online about Turkish poetry that I visited today. Actually, there were French translation that I read this morning. This was great, so thank you very much for that. But of course, this is not the topic of today. The title is Revisiting Trust for Better Interaction with Information. Professor, stage is yours. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. Are you able to see my screen? Okay. Thank you first for invitation and for the amazing talk before me. I think that was a great talk. Of course, we all learned so much from Filippo over the years. I come to the misinformation research from a slightly different angle. And maybe that provides kind of an interesting way of thinking about things. So it's going to be kind of an overview of how I think about this. Before I started working in this field, I was very much involved in understanding computational models of trust, understanding what trust terms means and how we can measure them based on network activity. So basically, I wanted to take a step back and revisit trust. And basically, most of the work that we do in misinformation is actually to access better information. So maybe it's better to think about this from kind of this perspective. So I'm going to think about this as a way to think about how trust informs the way we do misinformation. So this engages me in various ways. So one, we have to think about how trust is signaled, things that we leverage in our algorithms. The second one is that how trust might be undermined. I think that's something everybody in this community knows quite well, but I'm going to get back into that. But ultimately, the thing that we also really care is that how trust can be encouraged. We can't really make people trust other people, but we can try to foster an environment that engages it. So to kind of motivate this, I'm going to start with a case study of COVID-19. This is sometime in December when I'm hoping to go to sabbatical in Europe in 2020. And, you know, I'm an academic studying misinformation. And I'm going to look at this conversation between my mom, who is a retired professional, but she lives in a country with significant press freedom issues. So I want to kind of give you some idea of some of the conversations we had. So early December, I tell my mom that I really would like to come and visit you, or you can come and see me in Europe. But this is a good time since we are close in geographically. So I have to say that I'm from Turkey. So this is a good way to remind people where I'm from. So, you know, I say you can either come or I can visit. And my mom basically says, well, you know, I'm really worried about this virus. You know, I have to see what's going to happen. And I have to share at this point that I've actually been reading some epidemiology studies by, you know, big giants like Vespignani, who were talking about how the virus may actually spread. You know, and the current restrictions were not enough. But, you know, I said, well, I know, but I still need to live our lives. You know, you're just kind of exaggerating this. So some time has passed. Eventually we are in Europe. We, you know, were there for about 2 weeks. And I asked my mom, I said, okay, this is like mid-February. I said, well, what do you think about, you know, coming and visiting us? You know, now we know the place and you can come and see us. At which point my mom, under, you know, no suspicion, she says, no, I decided this risk is too high. We are not going to go anywhere and you should not come here as well. It's kind of very, very definitive answer. So I basically, you know, have to say, like a week later, the whole world learned that it was spreading very, you know, widely in Italy, and kind of the world suddenly woke up that it was in fact here. And and everybody understood. Luckily, I was able to come back to US, and then everything has happened that we know all about. So as a misinformation scientist, I thought about myself, and I thought about, well, really, it just has so much has to go right for us to actually listen and get good information. I mean, theoretically, I had all this good information, but I actually did not really want to believe it because it was kind of inconvenient for myself. So, this is very similar to the attention, but in addition to attention, it's just that I didn't want to believe it. The second one was that, clearly the good information skills are not hereditary. It's not like I know how to do this. My mom had it, but I did not at that point. But I think the most important for me was that I did ask my mom, how did you know so well before everybody that this was going to be a problem? And, I understood that despite being in an information poor environment, she was actually, she actually had one person that she listens to very carefully. And this person is an expert and she trusts this person. And this person is not just as a good expert in just overall, but a good person in synthesizing and explaining information. So there's a lot of lessons to learn from how to understand lots of factors and how to study them. So coming back to my original question, so I looked at, okay, let's look at what we know about models and constructs of trust and how they inform our study. So one of the things that anybody who studied trust knows that there are kind of two slightly different dimensions of trust. And the one dimension has to do with the social trust. When we talk about mistrust, distrust, we generally mean the left side, the things that has to do with integrity, trustworthiness, honesty, reliability of people, groups, or others. When we look at the other side, we have trust for expertise, intelligence, competence, and all of these kind of sometimes are lumped together, but they're not the same thing. So expertise or intelligence, generally, as we see people acting positively, then we believe that they are more expert. And when we see them acting, once we believe that they're expert, when we see them acting badly, we actually, will forgive them. But this is exactly the opposite in the other side. When we have trust of reliability, we basically immediately can go with a negative signal from trust to distrust. And even if after we distrust someone, even if we see positive actions, then we will actually not believe them. And even more importantly, when we distrust someone, then all other impressions of competence can be overridden. Even if they are competent, we are not going to believe. So when we look at trusting information, then this problem becomes even more complex. So there are many parts of trusting a piece of information that has to do with the reliability of the source and the expertise of the source. And it's important that the expertise is kind of proper for the specific task. And also, very important of all of this is what I think about it and whether this information confirms to my beliefs and knowledge, such as the polarization is very much caused by this, because information that does not belong to my belief system causes me discomfort. So, and the context, the attention span, the information overload, the level of risk, uncertainty in the decision will decide whether I choose, my opinion over an expertise, or I will just choose the source as overriding condition for deciding whether to trust information. So all of these factors are important in deciding, and the context, in fact, changes this. So this is the problem that I study. So coming back to how this informs my work, let's take a look at a few things. We studied before, this, how we can actually understand how experts signal themselves by studying language. So best experts, the ones that have gotten the most attention, are the ones who can speak to the public or the peers according, in accordance with how they would understand. So we found that there are a bunch of good signals for this, like complexity of words, language, commonality of terms, self-referential ways of adapting to the community standards. So we've studied experts on Twitter and Reddit and various expertise communities, and we had, reasonably good performance of these. So the way that the words are used is a good signal of competence, and that is a part of information trust. But obviously, with everything there are limitations, right? We are unable to really so easily assess the correctness, appropriateness of value of something by using just words alone. And this is why we rely on social cues, which tend to tell us a lot, but they can be subject to manipulation. Again, that's something we just heard about. So, they can be good signals, but they can also be unreliable. As far as integrity signals, we know in misinformation language that misinformation is written to sensationalize, cause moral outrage, anger, hatred for certain groups. So most of the time, this aims distrusting of others by bypassing our, assessment of whether they are competent or whether what we know. Because when we are emotional, we make our emotions make the decisions, not other factors, not rationally. So, and there are many other cognitive tricks people use to convince people. So things like repetition, hedging of claims to claim later that I was joking, making simple statements. So over time, we have developed hundreds of features and use these in predicting accuracy. And we have actually developed code and data sets. These are all freely available. And in fact, in the morning, I was in the data challenge that used one of our data sets. So one of the things we have been collecting is all the news articles published by hundreds of news sources over a long period of time, so that we can look at how these sources behave. So we have shown that it is possible to get very good prediction with these. However, one thing that you cannot do is understand intent by content alone. And since we study news sources, that content is really what we have. And also, it is possible that even the same piece of information can be read very differently by different groups. So their language, the same language may have a very different meaning. So, so this is important because this means that there are limitations to this work. So one of the things that we have found, though, by collecting and using this data set over the many years, that a lot of the sources actually share information from each other. So there are, of course, news wire services that they would publish, and everybody would publish from them. And there are some good news, conspiracy producers that other people publish, but there is a wide range of publishing of news others have started, others have published, republishing it in the network. So if we look at this and construct this publishing behavior network, we call it the constant sharing network, there's a lot of interesting things in this network. First of all, a lot of well-known communities actually quickly show up: left-wing, right-wing, conspiracy, mainstream. And this network is actually a very good window to intent, because we know that when you publish something from another source, you're actually making a decision to elevate that to your community, right, to your audience. So we have been finding a lot of good uses of this network in various ways. We have been studying this behavior. And so one of the things that we have been looking at is, I'm going to skip this one for a second. I guess I actually have to go back. One of the things that we have been looking at is that when you look at this network, it tells you something about the reliability of the sources because of where they belong. And we find that if you connect this with actual word-based, feature-based methods, you actually get very reliable predictions. So this work is under review, but it's a very good way of thinking about how we can understand intent. So this is kind of the work, but there are other aspects of trust that we can think about. So this is a trust network, but we can look at whether if we were to tell information that, this is unreliable, will people even use this information? So this was a paper we published last year where the information does help if we say AI thought that this was unreliable, but what we do find is that there is caveats that people who are good at this task will actually do better by AI, whereas people who are bad at that task don't improve or even get worse. So it was a mixed message. Another thing that, that we have started working on is thinking about how we can use this network as a way to improve trust. So instead of thinking about just saying that, we are going to identify and tell you that this is misinformation, can we use some of the well-established social science methods like nudging, for example, to show people alternatives that are closer to their point of view as opposed to totally opposite, instead of telling them this is completely wrong, as at the point of making a decision, show them alternatives that are closer to their point of view, but objectively slightly better. So that, of course, is based on other external evaluations of this data, which is also in our data set. So these are some of the trust questions that we have been asking, but there are much more difficult questions that are still ahead of us. So we have been talking about measuring trust, understanding how people use language to target mistrust or to signal competence, and to understand how the network shows us, trust behavior shows us where people's ideas may lie. But there are many more aspects to trust that we don't yet capture super well. And I think the talk right after me will probably touch up on those as well. So one of the things that's really important to me, because I started with this example with my parents, is that my parents trust me. And what does that mean? So it is not a single shot experiment that I tell you whether something is good or bad, but it is important when I don't know something that I will say so. So we need to understand why we are doing certain things, and we need to explain and publicize the limitation. And more importantly, we need to recognize and correct errors. And how to do that appropriately, and how to do that properly, how to build our systems to audit themselves, how to expose errors, and show that the transparency can help foster trust. But these are not things that we don't know exactly how to do yet. For example, there are well-known examples of whether to apologize or to reject, but and depending on the type of error. But these are all things that we need to start thinking about how to put in our systems. And of course, the most important thing is always oversight and improvement, which I know that everybody in this community is working towards. So that sums up my work. Basically, there's a lot of work ahead of us, and it's done, of course, with all my collaborators and my lovely students who contributed to this work. And I believe that starting from the point of trust gives me a way to understand why I am doing or where I'm trying to reach. And hopefully it is another way of looking at, this problem. And I look forward to questions. Thank you.